During a private briefing in Brussels, a European finance official admitted something that should have never been said out loud. We thought freezing Russia's assets would bring them to their knees. Instead, we created something we can't control. At the time, that sounded dramatic. Now, it looks prophetic. Because what Europe did to Russian money didn't just punish Moscow, it cracked the foundation of the global financial system. And almost no one is talking about what happens next. This is the story of how a $15 billion decision may go down as one of the greatest strategic blunders in financial history. Let's rewind to February 26, 2022. In response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the European Union and its allies froze roughly $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves. This wasn't a sanction. This wasn't a tariff. It was something entirely new. For the first time in modern history, Western nations immobilized the sovereign reserves of a major global power. These were not oligarch yachts, not private bank accounts. This was state money, central bank money. And for 2 years, those assets just sat there, frozen, untouched. Behind the scenes, European policymakers argued endlessly about what to do next. Confiscate them? Return them later? Use them as leverage? Everyone knew one thing. Once you cross this line, there is no going back. In May 2024, Europe convinced itself it had found a compromise. They announced they would not seize the principal. They would only take the interest, about $3 billion per year. That money would be transferred to Ukraine as military aid. On paper, it sounded reasonable. See, European leaders said, we're not stealing, we're just using the profits. But this logic ignores a brutal reality of financial warfare. There is no partial theft. Either property rights exist, or they don't. The moment Europe touched that interest, the message to the world was clear. Your assets are safe here, until politics decides otherwise. Russia didn't protest, they didn't beg, they didn't escalate militarily, they waited. And within 48 hours, Moscow responded with precision. A new decree was issued. Any European company with assets inside Russia was now exposed to retaliatory seizure. Not random, not chaotic, perfectly symmetrical. Europe seized roughly $15 billion in Russian assets and interest. Russia would seize exactly $15 billion in European corporate holdings. No more, no less. That detail matters. This wasn't revenge, it was a message. The list of exposed companies stunned European capitals. Major German manufacturers, French multinationals, Austrian banks, energy giants, consumer brands. Collectively, European corporate exposure in Russia exceeds $200 billion. Russia didn't threaten all of it. They didn't need to. They targeted just enough to hurt. And suddenly, European boardrooms erupted. Executives were calling ministers. Shareholders were demanding answers. Employees feared layoffs. Governments had seized Russian state money. Now their own private sector was paying the price. Here's where this stops being retaliation and becomes strategy. Russia didn't treat Europe as a single bloc. They treated it as what it really is, a coalition with fractures. Companies from countries that aggressively pushed asset seizure faced consequences. Companies from countries that expressed hesitation, left alone, this created pressure inside the EU. Punishment for the loudest voices, rewards for restraint, no tanks, no missiles, just incentives. This is how empires are weakened, not by frontal assault, but by exploiting internal contradictions. For decades, Western finance rested on one sacred idea. Property rights are inviolable. Governments can tax, they can regulate, but they cannot simply take. That principle died in 2022, and it was buried in 2024. Every central bank in the world noticed, not publicly, quietly, because the question they all asked was simple. If it happened to Russia, could it happen to us? The answer is obvious. Since then, something historic has been unfolding. Central banks are quietly diversifying reserves, reducing exposure to dollars and euros, increasing gold holdings, building bilateral trade arrangements, creating payment systems outside Western control. Not ideology, risk management. Because trust, once broken, doesn't come back. We're already seeing the consequences. More trade settled outside the dollar system, more reserves held outside Western jurisdictions, alternative financial centers rising, cities offering neutrality instead of ideology. Capital doesn't care about speeches, it cares about safety. And safety now means distance from weaponized finance. Supporters of the seizure say this is about justice, punishment, deterrence. But finance doesn't operate on morality, it operates on incentives. You can win the moral argument today and lose the system tomorrow. Most countries didn't choose sides, they chose survival. Russia's response wasn't about recovering money, it was about proving something larger, that financial weapons are not one-sided, that sanctions invite counter-sanctions, that dominance has limits. This destroys the illusion that financial power is absolute. And once that illusion breaks, everything changes. Europe thought it was punishing Russia. Instead, it rewired global finance. The $15 billion will be forgotten. But the precedent won't, because this wasn't just a sanction. It was the moment the world realized Financial warfare cuts both ways. And once the rules are broken, no one gets to pretend they still exist.